I'm Henry Granito, this is Madison, and we had the 19th century American homes. Our first one here.
Hope that recording gets screwed up. Yeah, crap. Hold on here.
Okay. I can just manually go through it, I guess.
Yeah, if you can go back, that'll work. Oh, there you go.
Okay.
Mid's had to look it up.
Thank you.
All right, you got it. All right, go ahead.
This is the 19th century early Gothic revival. The history of it is it was primarily built in the 1830s through the 1860s. It started in Baltimore, where it was built by Alexander Jackson Davis in Maryland, Baltimore. Interesting facts about this. It was inspired by a revival of medieval culture in England. In the U.S., there was a common form called Carpenter Gothic, where in England it mostly relied on brick and stonework, as you can see there. Carpenter Gothic relied more on the ready supply of wood that was available in the U.S. And it was featured in Rural Residences, which was Jackson Davis's book, which is considered the first house planning book published in the U.S. Characteristics of this is a steeply pitched roof, which you can see both here, here, and here. It's very angled upwards, and it comes to what, in quotes, you can see the pointed arch, which is that area at the top, which is kind of, comes up to a stem and points up, and sometimes there's a decorative piece resting along that. And even though it isn't an arch, it's more of a triangular shape, it's still there. There are gables, which is that triangular section under the pointed arch in that roof, which often had decorative barge boards, which you can see resting there in the white, which they would put on there for a decorative piece, and dormers, which you can see an example of there. It's kind of that adjacent window that sticks out of the building, which you can also see there. Location is, although they are spread out through the country, they are concentrated in the eastern U.S., especially along the coast and up north. And, of course, they were across Western Europe, because the revival I mentioned earlier wasn't just in the U.K., it also happened in parts of France, Germany, and Spain. Likes and dislikes. I really like the artistic and decorative elements, the barge boards, the gable pieces, but I didn't really like the pointed arches, because to me, it made everything below it seem kind of ill-proportionate and skinny. My next is the 19th century American Egyptian revival. This one started and was dominant from the 1820s to the 1930s, but had largely fallen off into the 20th century. The first building was built in 1824, and that was a synagogue in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. The second Egyptian revival was a time in which, around the 1850s, after the first Egyptian revival, popularity with the style had largely fallen off until the discovery of King Tut's tomb, which kind of caused a resurgence because people were very interested in Egyptian history. This style is rarely found in homes. You'll find it more in like synagogues, religious buildings. Sometimes you'll find it in meeting halls, stuff like that. Characteristics of it is the decorative capital, which you can see that it rests on the top of the column, which connects it to whatever it's supporting, like the roof. Flat roofs, which you can see here. Battered walls, which you see in the bottom left picture, where they kind of slant inward from the building. And a deep cavetto, which you can see in this bottom right picture. It's kind of the roof comes up to a point and begins to slope up and outward over the structure. And an ashlar finish, which you can see better on the right and top right picture than on the left, which is basically a bunch of uniform stones that were cut to meet about the same, basically just uniform bricks. And the location, they're scattered throughout the Midwest to the east, Ohio, of course, Pennsylvania, and along the coast, although there aren't as many down past South Carolina. Likes and dislikes. I really like the decorative pieces, the deep cavetto, the decorative capitals, but I don't really like the blockiness of these buildings. To me, they're kind of like a square in which they just kind of cut a bunch of decorative pieces out of it. And that moves me to the 19th century Octagon house. The history of these is the 1850s was the height of its popularity, although it had been around since 1806. The first house built was Thomas Jefferson's house, Poplar Forest in Virginia, that was built in 1806. This craze that started around 1848 stretched all the way to Canada, especially in the easternmost provinces. It was what started this craze was Orson Fowler's 1848 book, The Octagon House, and yeah, it also has been around. Although the craze started in America in 1848, it's been around since ancient Athens, which I know the quality is pretty low here, but that is an octagon house in ancient Greece. Of course, the characteristics is going to be an 8-sided plan. It is an octagon house after all. They commonly have a flat roof, which you can see better on the bottom right picture rather than the top left. They usually had a cupola on the roof, which is that kind of dome-like circular structure you can see on the top there. They were typically 2 stories, which you can see in both of these. And they usually had a centering spiral staircase. The location, you'll find them in the eastern U.S. There are a few throughout the Midwest in places like Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. And of course, as I mentioned, there were a few up in Canada. Likes and dislikes. I really like the simplistic, kind of spacious design. It's an octagon with a center spiraling. That's basically everything's built around that. And I like the cupola. I like the roof decoration on what otherwise would have been a pretty plain roof. Just adds a nice touch to me, and I don't really dislike anything about these buildings. That leads me to the mid-century High Victorian Gothic. These peaked in the 1870s, and the first building built in the U.S. was built in New Haven, Connecticut. It was the New Haven City Hall Courthouse, and that was built in 1861. It started in England, very similar to the Gothic Revival style, which you can probably figure from High Victorian Gothic. It wasn't really common in residential architecture. A lot of these buildings were much larger. It was a lot more common in commercial, civic, and religious institutions. You'd find it in churches, you'd find it in universities and stuff like that. Characteristics of this, it is a Gothic architecture after all, so you'll find, of course, the pointed arch. A gabled roof, which I mentioned earlier, that triangular portion on the roof, instead of having it come down like a hipped roof, just leaves that triangular area. Commonly had towers, which was kind of the mix from the Gothic and High Victorian eras. And heavy stone and brickwork. There wasn't much carpentry. It's not carpenter Gothic like the early Gothic revival. It's a lot of stone. And that leads me to the polychromy, which is basically the use of clashing colors. You've got kind of yellow, orange with a blue roof. They like to mix colors up in that. Location in England and northeastern America. Of course, you're going to find them in England because that's where they originated. And you're going to find them, although they are scattered throughout, there was a building at a university in Kansas. The most concentrated you'll find them is in northeastern America, especially in New England. The likes and dislikes, I really like the contrast in colors and the use of brickwork, the masonry. And I really like the use of tallers. It adds like a much better structure to me. And the dislikes, I don't really have it, because although I did dislike the pointed arch in the early Gothic revival, with this, since they're not really common in residential architecture, which is much smaller, to me, it makes it seem not as ill-proportionate, because although it does make it seem skinnier, the overall size of the buildings just makes it seem fitting to me. And this leads me to the 19th century Roman Tuscan style homes. The history. These were popular from the 1840s into the 1870s, although they were still built into the 20th century, but in much less of a number. The first one was built in 1844, and that was North Carolina Governor John Moorhead's estate. It was originated from Italy, as you can probably figure from Villa and Roman Tuscan. But it originated from Italy when people wanted to escape the city into the, less busy countryside. So they build these large, beautiful villas. It was originally called Tuscan Villa instead of the Roman Tuscan homes because it was a villa. And it also gained popularity in England in the 1840s, but had largely fallen off into the 1850s, about 20 years sooner than in America. Characteristics of this is it's usually constructed from stone or stucco. And stucco is kind of this tan-ish cement mixture. You usually have a low-pitched roof, which you can see on both of these. It's not very angled. It's very close to being flat. And commonly had terracotta roof tiles, which are those sort of hardened clay-y type red, brownish roof tiles. They usually had tall windows with shutters, which you can see in the bottom left picture. They're very large and lends to the openness of the building, and enclosed courtyards, which I think is really cool, which you can see in the top right. Within the building, there's usually one of those areas where you kind of have it in an open area, but it's still within the property. Location, of course, you're going to find them in Italy and in England, like I mentioned. And they're scattered across the U.S., all the way from North Carolina, sorry about the bad quality, but all the way from North Carolina to California. They're scattered throughout the U.S. Likes and dislikes. I really like the spacious design, especially the enclosed courtyard. I think that's really cool. Just having your own little area that's still open but within your property. And I really like the large windows because that also lends to that spacious design as there's a lot of light coming in. And I really don't dislike anything about these structures. And that leads me to my partner.
This is the High Victorian Italianate. The history of it was built in Britain around 1802, and it is a traditional American design despite its name. The popularity began in 1804 in the U.S., and for a century it was very common. Some of the characteristics of the design is overhanging eaves, ornate brackets and cornices, tall narrow windows, segmented arches, and heavily ornate doors. The location of the style is found commonly throughout the U.S., but is native to England. Some likes and dislikes of this style is the intricate windows and doors, but dislikes are hip roofs and the blocky structures. The American mansard. The history of the American mansard originates in France and is a 17th century design designed by Francois Mansard. The popularity of the style hit in the 19th century. Characteristics of the style is dormer windows, rounded cornices, paired columns, brackets beneath eaves, balconies, and windows, and small entry porches. The location of the design is most common in Western countries, but is all around the world and is native to France. The likes and dislikes, what I personally like are the dormer windows and the paired columns, but I don't particularly like the roofs because I think they're hideous. The stick style. The stick style originates in America and was designed by Richard Morris Hunt. It is based off the Gothic era, Victorian ideas, and the Queen Anne houses. It was built around the 1870s and 1880s. Some characteristics of the stick style is overhanging eaves, decorative wood trusses, intricate stickwork, patterns of horizontal, vertical, and diagonal boards, and wooden canopies. The location of the stick style is found all throughout the U.S. and is commonly found in the East. Likes and dislikes. The likes I have for this style is the intricate stickwork, the overhanging eaves and patterns, and I don't have any complaints about the style. The Eastlake House style. It was built around 1833 and 1906, named after the English designer Charles Eastlake. The style is derived from furniture and interior design, which was also designed by Charles Eastlake. It was based on Victorian styles such as Queen Anne and stick. Some of the characteristics of this style is strapwork, latticework, carved panels, mansardic porches, and color combination. The location of the style originated in England, but is much more popular in the U.S. Some of the things I like about this design is the latticework, porches, and roofs. Some of the things I don't like is the color combination on some of the houses. And that's it.
Good job. Now listen, here's what we're going to have. Make sure, since I know
Just so you know when some of this is going on, you can go ahead and you can stop this. And now save this right, guys.
Pause. All right, good.